All right, so India is being hailed for its role as the host of the G20. The Delhi summit has been declared a success on every count possible, whether it's getting the joint declaration, the new economic corridor linking India, the Middle East, all the way to Western Europe, adding the African Union as a permanent member of the G20. So let's try and assess this. I'm going to go across to a very special guest who's joining us. Union Minister Hardeep Singh Puri is the Minister for Petroleum and Natural Gas. He's now joining us. Thank you very much, Mr. Puri, for joining us. Let me start off by asking you, you've been part of numerous summits in the past. How would you decode, how would you assess what the Delhi G20 summit has achieved? What is the biggest takeaway as far as you're concerned?
Well, first of all, I have no hesitation in admitting to my age and experience. I've been around for more than 50 years as a Foreign Service officer, for 39 in the international think tank UN circuit for another 6. That's 45, another 6 years as a minister. I've attended many summit level meetings. I've attended many G20 events in different capacities. And I can tell you, this one was sui generis, one of a kind, not only in terms of the preparations that went into it, the cultural extravaganza, the fact that you had over 200 meetings in 60 different cities, but most of all, in a very divided world, extremely divided, India was able to play the role of a unifier, and that shows in the successful adoption, unanimous adoption of the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration, and that has set a template and will continue to be regarded as a template, as a reference point for international relations by not only students of international relations, by the different advocacy groups, whether they're dealing with gender issues, climate finance, multilateral development banks, urban resilience, the works. I mean, this is a document without any footnotes, without any interpretative notes being placed by people, without any parentheses. Whenever you're negotiating an international document, I have a problem with this, you have a problem with that.
Yeah.
I think the fact is, given goodwill and political maturity, if you want to play the role of a unifier, India has demonstrated that with hands-on, dedicated commitment, right from the Honorable Prime Minister down to our diplomatic team, Amitabh, the young diplomats, etc., it is doable and it's been done. And I think it is a matter of great satisfaction. It should be for all those who were involved and for the rest of us who rejoice in its successful outcome.
Now, like I said, you've been part of numerous such summits and, part of the negotiating teams to try and find this joint communique. And as you said, in such a divided time that we live in, to find such a consensus document which had 83 paragraphs, all of it by consensus and adopted in unison is a huge task in itself. In fact, for journalists who are covering the summit like myself, on Friday evening when Amitabh Kant and his team addressed the press, they were not sure whether they will get a joint statement. Even on Saturday morning, they were not sure. When the summit began, they were not sure that they would get a joint statement. But by Saturday afternoon, it was done and dusted. I want to ask you, though, there is some criticism. I think Ukraine has said this because that was the most contentious issue, the Russia-Ukraine war. There is some criticism that the language on the Russia-Ukraine war has been diluted somewhat. There's no direct reference to Russia. How would you respond to that?
I mean, I don't know who is wanting to criticize what. Let's be very clear. If you have language against the use of force and unilateral action, then I'm afraid the language is there. And let me put it this way. Whose approval are you seeking? First of all, I think all the countries involved, and I say this without any doubt, the Chinese have expressed satisfaction at this outcome. The Western countries have. I heard the Latin American, the Argentinian president praising the summit and the outcome. President Lula, who's taken the baton from India, he was fulsome in his praise. The UK, France, everybody. Now what happens is that when you have a deeply divided world, you have one of two choices. One is that you can put a little more combustion fuel into it and say, let us magnify the differences. What is the operative para? I don't remember correctly, it's para 13. This is a time of peace, not war. Isn't that been India's stand throughout? Hasn't it been India's stand throughout that we need to use more diplomacy? What has happened has happened. If you want to use something, you want to condemn the threat of nuclear weapons, hey, wait a minute. I have a book on that. But who used nuclear weapons first? So every piece of language can be interpreted by one in one way and by another in another way. So I think the language in here, when it is studied by professional students and senior analysts who are commentators, they will all turn around and say this was an effective, navigated way through a divided world.
I also want your thoughts on, on the sidelines of the G20. The big announcement was the economic corridor between India, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, going all the way to Western Europe. How would you respond to, it's not a charge or an accusation, but this is how it's being construed, that this is a challenge, perhaps the most direct challenge that we've seen in the last 10 years to China's Belt and Road Initiative?
First of all, Zaka, I wouldn't say this is just a big development. This is a huge development. This is not something about today. This is something going into the future. What have you got to do? Minutes after the declaration was adopted, I chose to be modest. I said, I don't know enough about it. But, I just attended the bilateral meeting that the Honorable Prime Minister had with His Royal Highness, the Saudi Crown Prince, MBS. And, as we are picking up, there are elements about joining our ports. There are issues about cooperation with railway connectivity involving India, ports, the Middle East, into Europe, Britain, France, Germany, the EU, supported by the United States. Now, if you are looking at a futuristic world and you're looking at connectivity, you're looking at enhanced and multiplication of commercial activity, this is it. This is a challenge, you say, to what was done 10 years ago, the Belt and Road. I don't think so. That one has a design flaw in it. That is based on heavy debt. In fact, there are a lot of debt traps which has created. You see, what happens is, you must have projects which are economically viable. If you go to a developing country or a least developed country and you give them a big project which they will find difficult to, repay or to derive the required economic advantage out of it, they will go into a debt trap. So what's happened in that initiative or that process is a lot of countries have had to, cede their territory. They've had to say, okay, I give you my territory in return for the fact that I can't pay you back. This is not that kind of a thing. This is something far more realistic about producing connectivity. Producing connectivity can have a cost, but that cost also has to be recoverable through a market force operation. And I think that the UAE, Saudi cooperation there, then the European cooperation and India on this end. But I read somewhere that they're also looking at an African corridor separately.
Correct.
So all I'm saying is that I agree with you that this is big. I think it's huge. But I don't think that this is a challenge to that. It's an alternate scheme. And it's a far more viable, economically viable scheme and process.
And since you mentioned Africa, this summit will also be remembered for the fact that the African Union has become now a permanent member of the G20, so it will be the G21 from the next summit. There again, do you see in this divided world, India saying that it's become the voice of the global south, or it is the voice of the global south. Do you see, along with India, countries like South Africa, Brazil, etc., now becoming some kind of bridge nations, if you will, between a deeply divided West and Russia and China on the other side?
Zaka, I'm no one to correct you, but my understanding is that it will continue to be the G20. Just as the states, members of the group of 77, are called the group of 77, but there are 134. So the 54 members of the African Union, there are 55, but we don't recognize the 55th, which is not a member of the UN. 54 will join, but it will still be the G20. Insofar as Brazil and India, Brazil, South Africa and India is concerned, I don't see any difference there, because we've had traditionally very close collaborative arrangements with Brazil and South Africa. We still have a group called IPSA, India, Brazil, South Africa, the three democracies. We also have BRICS in there in which they are participating, and now the G20. I see, to some regret, that the action now is moving from the larger and somewhat unwieldy multilateral, 193 member grouping of the UN into a plurilateral setting of the G20. But I hope this will also electrify the multilateral system. But the problem there, Zaka, is that the Security Council, which is the designated authority to make determinations on whether there's a threat to peace and security and authorize countermeasure, that is paralyzed. Today, given the current situation, you have the United States and the other two members, your Western members of the P5, in a situation where the Chinese and the Russians are on the other side. So if the Security Council continues to remain paralyzed, you will find, not only because of that, but others, the Security Council has limitations it has to encounter. And more than that, the G20 becomes a great place for, as you witnessed in Delhi now. I mean, how many other occasions have you seen so many heads of state and government together, not only at Rajpath in the morning, paying a tribute to the Mahatma, or at a banquet hosted by the Mahamahim, by the President, or sitting in separate plenary session, and when the baton was passed to President Lula, or when the Prime Minister welcomed the AU chair, the President of Comoros. So that body language, I mean, it resonates, I think, and those pictures will resonate everywhere. I think it was a great wake-up call that a country like India, with its civilizational values, can and did play the role of a unifier in a deeply divided world.
All right, Minister Hardeep Singh Puri, as always, a pleasure speaking with you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18 with your thoughts and perspective on what is being roundly hailed as a very successful G20 summit. Thank you very much.